Hi, I'm Rebecca with the Institute for Justice, and I'm here with IJ attorney Diana Simpson. Diana is going to tell us a little bit about our newest case in North Carolina. Diana, what's going on?
So this case is about the town of North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, and the fact that it denied a permit to our client, a homeless shelter, to operate in violation of the U.S. Constitution and state law. And basically, the question is much bigger than just this particular shelter. This question is about whether the government can stop people from using their property in a productive and useful way. And so imagine that you wanted to use your property in a particular way. You went and checked all the requirements and you saw that you certainly could. You had to check off all the boxes on the list, but you can. And so you went and put together your application and you pulled together the fee, you hired an architect, you hired a surveyor, you pulled all these maps together, lists of all the neighbors and everything like that. And you met every single requirement on that list. But the government denied you anyway, and the government didn't have a good reason to deny you. And that is exactly what's going on here with North Wilkesboro.
Can you tell us a little bit about our clients and the shelter? How did it start, and who does it serve?
Yeah, so we represent the Catherine H. Barber Memorial Shelter, which is the county's only shelter, and it's been in operation for a little over 3 decades. And so Catherine H. Barber was this really remarkable woman who had a big heart and loved to help others. And so in addition to raising her own biological children, she opened her home and opened her heart to foster children, and she raised many over the years. And so when she ended up passing away, her family wanted to do something honoring her memory. And so to do that, they decided to open a shelter and continue her tradition of creating homes for other people. And so they are the only shelter in the county, like I said. And so what they do is they go through and provide temporary housing for people who are in need. And many of their clients are people who've had family breakdowns or acute economic distress, or are fleeing domestic abuse or something like that. And so they basically are just looking to get a little bit of help from going from nowhere to go to something that's a little bit more stable. And so the clients stay there for no more than about 2 weeks. And really the goal is just to transition people as quickly as possible into a more stable environment.
So there's a term that will come up in this case that we can explain to people who are watching, and that's conditional use permit. What is that, and how does it relate to this case?
So a conditional use permit is a government permission slip, essentially, that some property owners need to get in order to use their property. And so it is a particular permit that has been signed off on by either a city council or, in this case, the Board of Adjustment for the town of North Wilkesboro. Most property owners don't really have to deal with these in their lives, but occasionally they'll have to, and some people have to, like the shelter here, when they want to use their property for a particular purpose.
How are these permits supposed to work?
It is very burdensome, unfortunately. And so what property owners have to do when they want to apply for a conditional use permit is they go and pull together their application packet. And so in this case, it is a $75 fee, plus they have to go and get all of these site plans that require an architect and a surveyor and GIS maps. And then they pull together a list of all of the neighbors who might be affected by it and who are just nearby the particular space. And then they sometimes go and get experts who can talk about how this affects traffic or how this might affect neighboring property values, those kinds of things. And so once the applicant pulls together all of these materials, there's a hearing. And there's a hearing in front of the town Board of Adjustment here in North Wilkesboro. And so the applicant goes forward and puts forth all of their evidence, and it's a little bit like a court hearing, actually. And then the opponents to the particular use go forward and they put on their evidence saying, we disagree with this particular use for these particular reasons. And the board is then supposed to consider all of the different evidence and weigh it and come up with a decision about the conditional use permit. And so even in the best of times, these are very difficult procedures, and some people end up spending thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars on these proceedings just to get this government permission slip to use the property they want to use.
So what happened here? What went wrong in this case for our clients?
So the town of North Wilkesboro apparently just doesn't want a homeless shelter, at least not in the part of town that anybody can see it. Because the zoning code requires that shelters be in this particular part of town. It's called the Highway Business District. It's the only place they're allowed to be, and this particular space is just perfect for the shelter's needs. A local dentist had offered his space to the shelter when he realized that they had a need for it. And it's right in the middle of this district. It's near a bunch of businesses. There's no residential uses nearby. And it's close to the services that these shelters' clients need. And it's near local public transit. It's near fast food restaurants, all kinds of things. And there's a big road out in front and a big sidewalk in front of that road. And so it checks off all the boxes for the kinds of things that a shelter needs to do in order to open in North Wilkesboro. So the shelter followed all of the rules that they were supposed to. But the town didn't. And so the town put on this hearing and allowed evidence to be submitted that wasn't evidence. It was really just points of view that people had that really have no value in terms of evidentiary value. And, they ended up denying the permit for reasons that just don't make sense. One of the reasons they denied the permit was because there's a highway out front and there are sidewalks in front of the building. And perhaps the homeless people will walk out into the road and get hit by a car, and that's dangerous. But that doesn't make any sense because the code requires these shelters be next to busy roads and with sidewalks. And so you can't in one moment require this, but then in another moment ignore it completely.
So that seems wrong. Is it legal to do this?
It is not. The town of North Wilkesboro here violated both the U.S. Constitution as well as North Carolina state law. And so the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution has an equality provision that requires governments treat anybody who's similar in the same way. And so here, the town didn't do that. There are a variety of similar uses that don't need to get a conditional use permit. So a temporary drug rehabilitation facility, for example, that doesn't need to get a conditional use permit in order to open, and yet a homeless shelter does. Now, both of them serve people who are in acute need and have temporary residential facilities. And so it doesn't really make sense to require a conditional use permit for one, but not the other. Beyond that, the town also violated the North Carolina state law requirements in the way that they heard evidence and in the way that they made their decision, because the Board of Adjustment here didn't weigh the evidence. They didn't limit their consideration to just appropriate evidence. And they ended up making this decision that ignored the fact that the shelter met all the requirements and really created this presumption that they get the permit. And so the town ignored all that and really just wanted to kick out a homeless shelter. They just didn't want one in town.
So what would a win look like here? What would it accomplish if that were to happen?
Yeah, so a win here would have the immediate effect of getting a conditional use permit for the shelter, or at least getting some kind of authorization to open the shelter, so that they could move from their temporary facilities to this great space and start immediately kind of providing these services again. But it would also be bigger than our clients. A win here would help any property owner who has to apply for this kind of permit get the kind of review that the courts require, that the decider go through and rely on actual evidence and recognize that people should be presumed to be able to use their land in a productive way, just like the shelter wants to do here.
Well, thank you so much for explaining this, and we look forward to hearing more as the case goes on.
Thank you.